This next presentation is on Brixton Metals. We have with us the Chairman, President, and CEO of Brixton, Gary Thompson. I won't take up any more of his time and let him tell you all about the company.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining in, everybody. I'm just going to get right to it. Brixton Metals' strategy this year really is to conduct a systematic exploration, generating high-impact results, and ultimately advancing our projects through, through to a resource and basically building those out. Concurrent with that, we're looking for serious JV partners to help advance various projects. Just in, I guess, light of limited time here, I'll leave this for reading at your leisure. But just to say that we are a discovery-driven team, and we do spend a fair amount of dough in the ground. So that's our goal, really, is to get the capital to work in the ground and basically generate those high-impact results. Market facts. This year actually marks a 10-year anniversary for Brixton. So we're pretty excited about that, having survived this last downturn. And one interesting note here is that the company's traded about 150 million shares to date, given that we have about 173 million shares outstanding, and 40% of the company is held by the likes of Eric Sprott, management, Rob McEwen, Hecla, and Pan American US Global holds about 40% that do not trade, and so pretty significant liquidity, I'd say, for the company this size. Currently sitting on around 5 million in cash and no debt. Is our portfolio largely Canadian focused. We do have the Hog Heaven project in Montana. We recently announced we're actively drilling in LANGIS in Ontario, which is the famous cobalt camp high-grade silver project that we're working on, working towards putting a resource out. And the goal is to get 15 to 20,000 meters drilled there over the winter months. So there'll be a good amount of news flow coming out of that project over the winter. And we just recently wrapped up the season at THORN. The THORN camp, we had, I think it was 132 days where the camp was open, which is the longest season we had there. We spent about 4.5 million, 50% focused on new targets, GEOCHEM and geophysics, and the other half on drilling on the latter part. So I think it's about 5,300 meters drilled, and we still have yet to put out any results on that. So we're anticipating a fair amount of news flow between now and the end of the year. Just a little bit on THORN. I mean, this project was the company's flagship, really, since inception and 10 years ago. And it's not the same project today that it was even a couple of years ago. The land position has grown dramatically for a couple of reasons, but we'll get into that in a moment. But just to say that it's one of the largest land positions in the Golden Triangle, near 2,600 square kilometers of tenure. It is a district-wide system. We do have technically potential road access. There was a road to the Golden Bear mine on the south end of the property, which now we wrap around. The road has been, there's some bridges that have been washed out, so it needs some reactivation to officially get that road up and running. One of the things that we did this year, which was important, and it goes to our strategy of expanding the mineralization on this, is we collected over 6,000 soil samples and about 1,300 rock samples this year, largely on new target areas. You can see on this map is a regional copper trend. We're talking about a 70-kilometer mineralized trend, and it's pretty significant because up until a few years ago, some of these were unknown targets to us. And one of the things we did last winter was a compilation of historical data. So we data mined another 10,000 soils and 3,500 rocks to give us a pretty substantial database to work with. But we've got a couple of new areas emerging, like the METLA trend, the East trend, West targets that weren't really on our radar so much, prior to the last couple of years. So a substantial change for us. really we see this as a porphyry copper gold district emerging for us, and there's also some significant gold numbers here. This is a same map showing the gold values. So we've generated some very exciting copper and gold numbers this year on new targets. So the good part of the year was focused on geochem and geophysics. The latter part of the season, we started drilling in August, and that really focused on the Outlaw gold zone. I think we drilled about 16 holes there, and the Camp Creek porphyry target. We drilled a number of several deep holes there. The Camp Creek zone, this is a pretty significant new development for us. Last year we drilled this hole 150 that drilled 554 meters of about 2 grams gold equivalent, and then we stepped about a kilometer to the west and drilled hole 162, which actually was the first hole that intersected porphyry style mineralization here. So we do have a legitimate porphyry discovery. However, it is a blind porphyry, so the challenge is to really find the center of this thing. But what we recognize is that the previous drilling is generally been too shallow, and we need to be drilling significantly deeper on this target. But we are impressed with the number of high-grade samples that we're getting at surface here, and it keeps driving us to continue to find the source of it. This is a cross-section of the Camp Creek. You can see hole 150 here on the right side of the slide, and hole 162 on the left, again about a kilometer distance. And we drilled this hole 181, which went down to about 960 meters, which have the results are pending on this target. We didn't have this geophysics up until the summer, so we were waiting to get this second part of the IP survey done. If you can see my cursor here, this line that we're looking at, this profile, there's a chargeability IP chargeability profile is actually on this line here, this little dash line, and we're actually looking up the creek towards the east. So when we drilled this hole in 2019, we never had this IP, and so we went and drilled this hole 180 here down to 617. We would have liked to have pushed it deeper, but ran into some technical difficulties drilling. So we abandoned that, and then went to a vertical hole here down to, I believe, 930 meters depth there. Again, both of those two holes and the previous hole 181 are still pending results. What we did earlier on in the summer, starting in August, is we drilled a series of holes on this Outlaw target area. Actually, over on the west side, where we had some interesting geochem along this ridge, we drilled a series of holes, and then we moved up to the central zone, did some infill and extension drilling along this easterly trend. What's significant about the Outlaw zone is that it's not a porphyry style system. It's a sedimentary hosted zone in the classic sediment, siltstone, greywacke, but significant gold mineralization at and or near surface, and it has a geological and geochemical strike of about 4 kilometers, so fairly significant. We believe we can build a meaningful gold resource here, given the near surface and consistency of the mineralization here. This is just an overview of some of the geochem sampling we did this year. In red are the assays that we collected this year. For the first time, we brought in some geologists on ropes with mountaineering experience. And there's some pretty steep canyon walls here, so there's just areas that we weren't able to sample previously. And you can see some of the very high-grade gold, silver, and copper numbers coming out of this. These are high sulfidation mineralogy, which really continues to support our deep porphyry thesis here. And you can see some of the other gold numbers that we collected on the West Outlaw target as well. We made 2 acquisitions this year. One was the Trapper project. You can see here a small block relative to the size of the overall, but it was a strategic acquisition for us, and it builds out this portfolio into a much larger trend. The previous operator spent more than $4 million on this project in 2011, and they were drilling some pretty encouraging gold numbers fairly close to our mutual claim boundary. Now that we have this trend, This was about a 2-kilometer trend in golden soils that was originally found by a Chevron, and the previous operators drilled some nice visible gold. I believe there was a 0.4 meters of like 94 grams or something like that. But some pretty meaningful broad gold mineralization. And so we're planning to do some more work on this in 2021 and get this to a drill ready stage sometime later next season. We did some sampling along this Trapper Creek area, and we pulled a 36.9 gram gold sample this summer. And we do have more samples coming out still in the lab right now. But what's interesting about this Trapper, now that we've consolidated this block, we actually have a pretty meaningful trend. This is the work we did up on the northern part of this area. We're calling now the Trapper Gold Trend, but it seems to tie in and it lines up on this northwest trend with the previous work. It looks like this thing could be around the 5-kilometer trend here. So we've got some more work to do to infill in between here, but it looks like a pretty significant gold trend in the making, basically. So this would be a target for some drilling next season. The second acquisition we did this year is a project called METLA. This was from Stuhini Exploration, and this dates back to 1957 from the Kamenko guys. They did most of the work up in the northern part of this trend here on these structurally controlled breccias by the looks of things, but some pretty significant gold numbers coming out of this area. But what really piqued our interest on the project was this new sample they collected in 2019, 4.7% copper, 1.8 gram of gold, about an ounce of silver, and anomalous in palladium. And this was hosted in this sample over here on the right, which is a potassically altered porphyry unit with bornite and chalcocite and chalcopyrite. And what's interesting about that is that probably 10 or 15 years ago, this area was under ice. So it's right close to a Tolva glacier, what's left of one. And we did some radiometrics and pretty extensive sampling. And we've got a lot of copper hits in this area as well. So it's developing into a pretty exciting large-scale porphyry target for us. So we'll be definitely doing some more work on this target next season. A couple of things that we'd like to do next year, obviously with a meaningful budget, is a property-wide, either a mobile MT airborne survey or a ZTEM survey to give us a broad scope and regional structure to help put this project in perspective. The GEOCHEM has been working for us quite well, so we're going to continue to do more rock and soil sampling and prospecting and more actual geological mapping work to basically firm up those targets that we talked about. And the other part of the push next year is going to be to continue to drill on existing advanced stage targets to get those into some resource definition as we move forward here. So just quickly on the Hog Heaven project, we did some drilling on this project earlier in the season, about 1,500 meters. This project hasn't seen any drilling since the 90s, and most of the work was done in the 70s and 80s. It's a significant advanced stage project. It did have a feasibility study in the late 80s on this. Obviously, with gold and silver prices in the 90s, were fairly depressed, so it sat idle. But some quite high grade material came out of here, and there was some direct ship material that was mined. This is the map showing where most of the drilling was done. 722 holes historically. We drilled about 6 holes this year, mostly around on the main mine. Generally, most of the drilling was done fairly shallow. The O Hill, I think the average depth of these holes are like 30 meters, so quite shallow drilling generally. And we believe there's lots of potential on these targets. The Martin mine and Marguerite mine, there's a cluster of workings down here that hasn't seen much drilling either. So we think good potential to expand, and some pretty spectacular grade came out of this WF small underground mining up to 3,000 ounces per ton silver. This is the main mine where we did some of the drilling, really just confirming or validating some of the historical work around the main mine target area. Given the vintage of the drilling, and a lot of the drilling was done using RC versus core. So we cored these series of holes, and you can see these results here. Some pretty broad scale gold, silver, copper mineralization, and within that, some quite high grade zones within these broad mineralized intervals. So quite interesting. Really, two types of mineralization. We get sedimentary hosted stratiform, and we also get porphyry-related high sulfidation polymetallic mineralization as well. Here's what it looks like: semi-massive to massive sulfide, quite vuggy, quite interesting looking material, and some very high grade intervals as well. We did engage RPA to do some work. They've looked through the metallurgical work. There's a pretty significant amount of metallurgical work done on the project. So we're trying to figure out where do we go from here? How much more new drilling do we need to do to get this back into a compliant resource, and take next steps on maybe perhaps additional metallurgical work. So we're kind of working through that now to see what the next steps will be. But we think there's significant upside potential here for a high-grade underground operation, and so we're excited to advance this project forward. Now, just quickly on the LANGIS to kind of wrap things up, we are drilling out here now. We've got a drill turning at the LANGIS mine. This was one of the last producing silver mines in the cobalt camp, shut down in 1989, which is operated by Agnico. They produced 10.4 million ounces of silver at about 25 ounces per ton. Excellent infrastructure. It's pretty hard to beat. Our strategy was to drill in around the old workings to see what else we could find. And we've talked to a number of the old timers that actually worked out here. And we keep hearing the common theme is that there was ore in the floor. And there's still lots of mineralization here to be found. And so we've been successful in identifying a number of silver-rich areas. I think the takeaway from this project is that we've been able to demonstrate fairly broad mineralized interval as well, like 11 meters of 200 grams, 5 meters of 450 grams, 4 meters of 700 grams. So we're getting broad intervals. So you get this very high-grade narrow veins, but you also get veinlets and disseminated silver rosettes, plus or minus cobalt mineralization over reasonable width. So we're pretty excited about the drill program we're doing with the goal of getting this project into a resource category sometime in the Q1, Q2 of 2021. We did some surface sampling this year. We stripped some material off around the shaft number 3, where we had done some drilling earlier this year and had some good intercepts. So we wanted to see if these veins project to surface, and looks like they do. We sampled a 0.4 meter sample that returned about 3,000 grams per ton silver, and I think it was about 10% cobalt. And then there's some grab samples here in the picture you can see with native silver and basic cobalt mineralization, giving us over 6,000 grams silver and almost 17% cobalt. So pretty substantial. This is around shaft number 3. Shaft number 6 is off to the east here. So I think with that, I mean, the general plan for Brixton is to advance our key projects through drilling and get these into resource categories as soon as we can. And with that, I guess I'll maybe open it up for questions if there are any.
Thank you, Gary. We just have a little bit of time left. So maybe you could kind of sequence for us what the upcoming news events will be for the company.
Sure. Well, we started about a week, 10 days ago at LANGIS. So given the turnaround time, we're seeing greater than 2 months in the lab turnaround. We got to be getting pretty close to releasing some results on THORN because we started drilling there, I think it was early to mid-August. So we should be getting those news flows start to happening coming out of THORN. And I suspect by the next 6 weeks or so, we'll start to get some initial LANGIS results. So I'd say between, over the next week to the balance of the season, it's going to be a good amount of news flow, I think, coming out of basically THORN and LANGIS as well.
Excellent. That's all our time, Gary. Thanks very much for your talk, and please join us for the next presentation.
All right. Thank you.